Hey guys, this is Jan for Chess24. The Dortmund, what's called Sparkassen Cup 2017, the longest reigning super tournament on German soil, is over. 7 rounds have been played, and we shall look at one game from the very last round, played between former world champion Vladimir Kramnik and local hero Matthias Bluebaum. Before this round, the cross table looked a little surprising. Radek Wojtaszek in the lead with 3.5 out of 6 +1, while pretty much everybody else had 50%, 3 out of 6. The one notable exception being Vladimir Kramnik in sole last place with 2.5 out of 6. So clearly Kramnik had to and was going to win his game with the white pieces against Matthias Bluebaum, who 50% respectable score, might be unhappy with what happened in his game against Dmitry Andreikin, where he could not win a tricky rook endgame where he was a rook up, but Andreikin defended heroically and saved a draw there. However, Bluebaum did get a little lucky in round number 6 against Radek Wojtaszek, where he managed to save a worse endgame, which probably gave him some morale for having to play this tough last round game. Let's jump right into it. Kramnik starts with an old favorite of his, the move 1 knight to f3, and after d5 he goes for the reti 2g3. A line Kramnik played a ton a couple of years back, 2-3 years ago. Recently he's experimented with all kinds of different things, including lots of 1e4s and 1d4 sidelines. But for this game he probably has decided that against Bluebaum, who's an excellent theoretician, he should try to just keep the pieces on the board and play chess. Bluebaum chooses one of the most solid setups. There is d5, bishop g4, e6, knight f6, d3, bishop to e7, h3, bishop h5, and to my surprise, Kramnik plays the move c4 here. I'm not surprised by the move, but I was surprised by the fact that this position has only been seen twice so far in modern practice. But this idea to play c4 has become more and more common in all these reti positions. Back in the days, people used to play plans with queen e1 followed by e4 more commonly, but black is very solid in the center on the king side, so it's hard to make progress there. Therefore, the focus has shifted to trying to exploit the fact that this bishop is far away from the queen side. Therefore, you want to go c4, queen b3 and try to exploit these weaknesses. Could be that Kramnik borrowed this idea from another popular system against the reti, the system where the bishop goes to f5. And in this position, e6, d3, let's say h6 or bishop e7, it is clearly the main plan to go c4 followed by queen b3. So c4 played, c6, queen to b3. Bluebaum decides to not offer the exchange of queens with queen b6, which probably would have been met by something like g4, bishop g6, and bishop to e3. Typical idea, where white is trying to both create weaknesses on the black queen side, a7 is currently hanging, and play against this bishop, which is sort of locked out by the game. Due to the pawn structure, there's not that much this bishop can do. And if white manages to control some central dark squares, he can count on having a bit of an advantage here. a6, you could also go after the bishop, go knight e5, and then take it. Bluebaum decides to not have any of this, plays the move queen to c8. Of course, not a perfect square for the queen, but not giving any ground in terms of squares on the queen side. I know, I finished that sentence a bit strangely. cd5, g4 first, bishop g6, and cd5. Kramnik's trying to expose the problems of the queen being on c8. After c takes d5, which was played in the game, then the queen can get hit very quickly by a rook coming to c1. Well, e takes d5 might look natural, but after e d5, it's gonna be quite unpleasant to deal with the march of the white f-pawn. f4 followed by f5 could really embarrass this bishop on g6. Therefore, I believe Bluebaum chose correctly. Play the move c takes d5. After all, the black knight can always go to c6 and block the c5. Bishop f4, knight to c6, knight to c3, no need to rush with rook c1. Short castles, rook ac1, queen to d7. The queen vacates the c-file, and both sides have finished development. I would say the position is probably roughly equal. It's, in my opinion, a little easier to play with white because this bishop is still sort of locked out and has to find a way to make it into the game. The price white had to pay, however, is that he had to play g4, weakening his own king a little bit. Kramnik plays knight e5, very typical move for these structures, trying to exchange this very powerful defender on c6. That's what happened. The computer points out a different option that was also quite interesting. Just trying to open the position instantly by playing e2 to e4. D takes e, d takes e. This pawn can be captured with knight takes e4. But after rook fd1, the queen would have to go back to the 8th rank. And after queen c8 takes knight e5, white would get excellent compensation for the pawn because black is so passive. Didn't happen. Knight e5 was played instead, takes, and here Bluebaum correctly decides to play the move h5. First of all, reminding white that he has his own weaknesses, and secondly, giving this bishop a square on h7 should it ever be needed. You don't want to wait for white to go knight to b5, put a rook on c7, the knight on d4. Therefore, h5, g5, knight e8, I think is an excellent decision, provoking white to push his g-pawn even further, which is now under attack. The knight can always find back into the game, and currently does a nice job of covering the c7 square as well. Kramnik goes f4, gotta cover the g5 pawn, and Bluebaum takes another decision, which I liked a lot when I saw it, the move bishop to c5 check. There's other possibilities. The computer points out that f6 was quite playable here. After gf, he wants to go gf, bishop d4, and bring this knight back to life via f5. But it still feels a little shaky to weaken your king like that. The point of bishop c5 check, which Bluebaum played, is that you're more or less forcing white to go d3 to d4. And after d4, not only does this bishop get a much better view than it had before, you also no longer have to worry, really, about getting blown off the board by some timely e2 to e4. The problem for white is he has to go d4 because if the king goes to h1 or to h2, this bishop would appear on e3, and that would be very, very bad news for white. So d4 played, bishop to b6, and if white waits a bit here, black could either just consolidate by going knight to d6, or he could even think about maybe trapping this bishop on the e5 square. Therefore, Kramnik takes a decision you would expect from, especially the new Kramnik, the adventurous guy who plays for the initiative, who does not shy away from sacrifices, but is also very much in the spirit of the position. If you play a slower move here, you could just be worse with white. Therefore, Kramnik decides to sacrifice an exchange, beginning with f5. Bishop takes f5 is forced, and rook takes f5 is his point. E takes f5, knight takes d5. All of a sudden the position has transformed drastically. Black is a whole exchange up. White has one bishop versus a rook. But the white pieces are very active. This knight on d5 is of course doing a great job. While the black pieces are not fully coordinated yet. The rooks are not connected. This knight has to find a square. You have to decide if knight takes b6 is a threat. So there's quite some work to do here for black. However, an exchange is an exchange. Bluebaum plays a good move, queen to e6, hinting at the fact that this bishop is doing something, threatening queen takes e5. You would not be able to recapture because of the pin. Therefore, Kramnik has to break the pin. He does so by playing king h1. Alternative was e3 to stabilize this formation. But Kramnik goes king h1, and Bluebaum brings his rook to the center, plays rook to d8. So far so good. White doesn't have any direct threats, and he has to figure out what to do next. He had a very interesting option at this juncture that Kramnik does not go for, but I'm sure Kramnik spent quite some time calculating, and that is the move g5 to g6, trying to blow the position open before black is fully coordinated. The first point would be that queen takes g6, not a great idea because of knight e7. Check, knight fork. Things get more complicated after f takes g6, which softens this diagonal, but knight e7, king f7 would still allow black to stay very much in the game. Bishop d5 would be met by rook takes d5. However, there is a nasty move here. The move rook to c8. Queen c8, no good, knight e7 check, and rook takes c8. Loses sight of this d5 square, so that here bishop d5 would be devastating. F takes g6, therefore, is not a great idea. Now the natural move would be knight to d6. But once again, white has some nice tactics here. This time they start with knight f6 check. After gf6, gf7, we see the same problems on this diagonal, no matter how black recaptures. Bishop d5 would come. Okay, knight or rook probably. We would take the queen. But bishop d5 will pick up the queen here with a winning position. So why didn't Kramnik play g6? I guess that he spotted the strongest reply, which is the move knight to f6, which looks ugly because you get the so-called Irish pawn center, these 3 tripled f pawns. But nothing bad happens to black immediately, and he is still an exchange up. So therefore, it looks like white would not be able to keep his initiative going here. Black would be fine. Kramnik correctly decides not to play g6, even though it must have been tempting. Instead, he plays a move queen to f3, sort of unpinning the knight so that it can now move away without exchanging queens. Also, looking at the h5 pawn, and Bluebaum goes g6. Stabilizes, but weakens his dark squares a bit. Now, of course, you have to watch out for knight f6 check. Can't really move this knight. Kramnik realizes that black can't move all that much and plays a quiet move, the move e3, trying to stabilize, defend his d4 pawn, and then we just see what to do next. Here, Bluebaum misses a very strong move, a very strong way to coordinate his forces. You want to go f6 with black if you possibly can at some point. And one good way to prepare that was the move rook to d7. Tending to go bishop to d8, supporting f6. This bishop would find a new role, also attacking the g5 pawn. And it's not clear how white can make any progress here. Let's say b3, bishop d8, h4. Queen can come to a6. Black would have all the critical squares under control. Can think about f6, can think about messing around with his queen. Would not have been a very pleasant situation for Vladimir Kramnik. But Bluebaum, who had spent a lot of time at this point already, went for the move king h7, which is a useful move, but not necessarily an improvement of the black position, because in some lines you could construct scenarios where the king is actually better on g8 than on h7. We will see such later, especially after sacrifices on h5. Knight f4 played by Kramnik, and he's using the fact that queen takes a2 would be a bit of a mistake. The point is queen takes a2, runs into queen takes b7, so far so good. Queen takes b2, and now sneaky little move, the move rook to c6, using this pin of the f7 pawn to threaten the very powerful move rook takes g6. And once the rook lands there, it's curtains. Rook h6, rook h8. Therefore, all of a sudden, white would be winning here. However, Bluebaum does not fall for that and puts his queen to on e7. Queen d7 was also possible, but queen e7 looks logical, hitting the g5 pawn and asking white what he intends to do next. Kramnik here and earlier passes up another opportunity to take on b7. Kramnik never ever wants to exchange queens in this game. He wants to keep the pieces on the board and play for an attack. I was expecting h4, but the problem with h4 is that then black can play f6, takes, and his knight becomes very jumpy. Black will once again be in very good shape. Kramnik finds a stronger move. He finds the move queen to g3. That first of all stops f6, because now g6 would be under attack, so you can't really do that. And secondly, he prepares the not very subtle but quite effective plan, queen h4, followed by knight takes h5, in order to checkmate the black king. Which goes to show you the king is not always ideal on h7. Bluebaum, objectively speaking, is still all right. The computer points out still the move rook to d7. There's also the idea to play queen to d7 to prepare rook to c8. But both these moves look a little artificial. Bluebaum instead plays the most natural move, to my mind, the move bishop to c7. Tries to challenge this powerhouse of a bishop. And where this bishop exchange, the white attack would just disappear. Kramnik, however, is in no mood to have his attack disappear. And he invests a second exchange with the move rook takes c7, sharply pronouncing that this bishop on e5 currently is a much stronger piece than the rook on c1. Rook takes c7, knight takes c7, and the battle continues. I thought his point was to go queen h4 here, planning to go knight takes h5, but after queen h4, black should retreat with his king, king g8, knight h5, and after gh, queen takes h5 would run into f6. Queen defends everything, while bishop to f6 looks nice, preparing queen h5, queen h8. would be well met by queen takes e3, queen h5, and in this position black has a perpetual, starting with queen to c1 check, king h2, queen f4 check, and there is no escaping the checks. That's going to be a theme later in the game as well. Instead of all of these shenanigans, starting with queen h4, Kramnik plays the move bishop to f6, wants to install this bishop on its most dangerous square immediately before this e3 pawn could come under attack. Bluebaum plays the best move, queen to b4, keeping his queen active, dreaming of queen to d2 or maybe queen e1 check in some lines. And it looks like there is no direct breakthrough for white. If you were to play queen h4, same theme, then queen d2 is very strong. The point being knight takes h5, queen d1 check, followed by queen takes h5. Therefore, Kramnik starts with the move knight takes h5, which does not force black to take, actually. Knight to e8, as crazy as it sounds, was a move here, giving this whole rook, but after bishop d8, gh5, the computer is willing to defend the black position. Black would still be in exchange up with very unclear play. But what is wrong with g takes h5? That's probably also what Bluebaum asked himself. Now, if you go queen h4, the king can take care of himself. Going king g6, black would be winning. Instead, Kramnik relies on some pretty geometry here and finds the move g5, g6. I'm sure he intended this when he went knight h5. The first point is that fg runs into queen takes c7, followed by checkmate on g7 next move. And the second point is that after king g8, once again this king has to go back to g8, where it could just have stayed a couple of moves ago. But after king g8, white gained new fuel for his attack. He goes queen to g5 with a not very subtle but quite effective plan to go queen h6 followed by queen g7 or queen h7 or queen h8. Checkmate. Not easy to fight against that plan. The computer gives knight to d5 as the best chance. Once again, leaving a whole rook en prise in order to challenge this bishop on f6 so that after queen h6 you'd be able to take this guy and win the game. But white instead should take the rook. Queen to d6 back is the best defense, once again challenging this bishop. Gf, king f7, queen h5, king g8. This bishop goes back to h4, and once again we have a weird situation where white is an exchange down, but has the two bishops and now a pawn. Black king is quite open. Hard to judge. I guess it's a little easier to play with white, but all three results still very much in play. Instead, Bluebaum thought he had spotted an idea how to create a perpetual check. But that idea turned out that had a flaw. He played h5 to h4. You can see the engine bar exploding. This move does not work. It's quite educational why it doesn't work. Kramnik plays queen to h6. Had he taken on h4, then black could just go f takes g6, create a luft for his king. The game will continue. But queen to h6 at first sight runs into this perpetual check that Bluebaum had created. The problem is it's not a perpetual. Queen e1, king h2, queen g3, king g1, queen e1. King h2 would of course repeat moves, but it turns out that little dribbling on white's part gets the job done here. He goes bishop f1, queen g3. Now of course you don't repeat by playing bishop g2. Instead the king goes to h1. Since there's too many mating threats, queen g6, queen h8 doesn't get the job done. And after the only sensible check, queen f3, white would go bishop g2. Not really changing the positioning of any of his pieces, but now the black queen is on the wrong track, has to give a check from d1. And after king h2, there's no more checks. And mate cannot really be prevented anymore. Therefore, Bluebaum resigned, I believe, after bishop to f1. And Kramnik would win his first game of the tournament, which leads to some confusing final standings. There was a lot of bloodshed on the other boards as well on that day. Let's have a look. Before the round, we've seen everybody was on 50% with 3 out of 6. After the round, Kramnik, one of the two guys who was not on 50%, turns out he's the only one to finish the tournament on 50%, 3.5 out of 7. The tournament was won by Radek Wojtaszek, who in the last round defeated the other German participant, Liviu Dieter Nisipianu. Congrats to Radek Wojtaszek, I believe it's his first super tournament victory. For the Germans, it was a rough last round. Both lost and ended the tournament on -1, having gone into it with 50%. So I guess that everybody but Radek and Fedoseev, who also had a very good outing, will have some regrets about this tournament. Vladimir Kramnik winning his last round. He got his rating back up above 2800. Is the number 4 in the world. And will still have to wait for his 11th victory in Dortmund? I believe he won 10 times in 25 years participating in Dortmund. That's it. What was I going to say? Thank you guys for watching. See you in the next video. I guess that's what I was going to say. Bye.